Everybody, we've got a packed agenda tonight, so I'm going to make a start here. My name's Andrew. I work at the Biosphere Institute of the Bow Valley, and just welcome everybody to Earth Talks. It's great to see so many people out here. It's been a collaboration with the Canmore Library we've been putting on this year. Earth Talks is just inspiring conversations about the environment. And yeah, we've had a bunch of different talks, but tonight we've got Sharing the Bow Valley and three fantastic presenters. I'm going to let Gareth facilitate and lead everybody off, introduce everybody as we get going here. But first, I just wanted to take a moment and acknowledge that we're meeting on Treaty 7 territory. So it's the native homeland of the Yahe Nakota First Nations of Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstone. Sorry, we've got some crossover. Okay, good. As well as the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Sultana First Nation, and the Métis region of Alberta Region 3. And of course, all of us, we're all Treaty people. And more recently, I've been kind of exploring this because last year I became a Canadian citizen, and so I've joined into that. I'm a treaty person now, and reflecting on what it means to belong to somewhere, to call somewhere home, I think is something that we should all do in the context of a treaty and a treaty place, because I think that's a really important part of it. And something, a few people have heard me say this before, but I'm reading Braiding Sweetgrass at the moment. If anyone hasn't read it, should. They've got it in the library here. And this line just keeps coming back to me of like, you know, I'm sure for all of you, you love the land. I love the land. But what am I doing to make the land love me being on it? And our conversation tonight, I think, is going to really explore that a little bit more in a particular context, all around wildlife corridors and grizzly bears and recreation. So yeah, I just wanted to say that to set us up. At the back, you've got some more information about the Biosphere Institute and what we do. We are a charity and a not-for-profit. There is a donation bin there. You can put a little bit of cash in, a coin, it all helps, or scan a QR code. But yeah, we appreciate anything with that. And with that, I'll just invite our Executive Director, Gareth, to come up and get us going.
Hey, thanks, Andrew. All right, thanks everyone. So I'm the Executive Director of the Biosphere Institute of the Bow Valley. We have a mission of championing community leadership to address environmental challenges, and we're going to do that so well tonight. It's not even funny, and I'm thrilled. This is such an important conversation, and I'm just gratified that you took the time out of your busy lives to be here tonight. One of my heroes, Barry Lopez, has a quote: "One of the great dreams of humans must be to find a place between the extremes of nature and civilization, where we can learn to live without regret." And so here we have the extremes of nature. We have wild animals roaming this valley. We have the extremes of civilization. You know, people like Andrew and I and all of you just like doing this thing and going recreating in the place that we call home. And I personally have my feet firmly planted in both camps, and I would rather not live without regret. How about you? Yeah. And so this is an important conversation that requires respectful listening, requires understanding common values and respecting different values. At the end, I'll talk about a process that will be a much bigger, much more hopefully long-standing and grandiose and sustainable process. And this is a small version of that. It's the Canmore Area Trail Strategy. So I'll give you a little bit of tidbit about that at the end. But for now, we want to get going here. We have three awesome speakers. And I'm going to introduce our first speaker, who is Josh Welch. So Josh is the Senior Manager of the Communities and Conservation Program at the Yellowstone, Yukon Conservation Initiative based here in Canmore. He is grateful to be living, playing, and working in the Bow Valley on Treaty 7 territory. He joined YY after working for 20 years as a landscape architect, national park ranger, and mountain town planner to develop a body of work that seeks balance between land-based conservation and development in Canada and the United States. And this whole balance phrase is the key phrase for this evening. The title of tonight's talk is Sharing the Bow Valley, Balancing Human Use with the Needs of Wildlife. Josh's primary work at the YY is with communities of people and exploring how they might thrive alongside wild places and intact nature. Ladies and gentlemen, please give it up. And do it on the Zoom too. I know no one can hear you, but that's okay. Big round for Joshua.
Everybody. All right. Hello. Thanks to the Biosphere for this opportunity to talk. I don't need to tell you who I am. For anyone who here today who's new to Y2Y, we're a transboundary and environmental nonprofit. We're committed to connecting and protecting wild places and habitat from Yellowstone National Park to the Yukon, so people and nature can thrive. So we're dedicated to securing the long-term ecological health of this region. It's about 3,400 kilometers long, pretty big. And our particular focus is on wide-ranging species whose needs extend beyond protected area boundaries. That's me. I'm an ultra runner when I'm not a dad or working. Today, I'm going to share with you a bit about the cumulative environmental effects from human presence in the Bow Valley, specifically how we might be able to lessen our collective impacts from recreation. All right, so we focus on grizzlies. And why grizzlies? Well, they're a primary indicator. They're an umbrella species, so it means they safeguard the lands in which they need. They also safeguard a number of hosts of other mammals, plants, and other things. And so when you take care of grizzlies, you take care of a very large place, largely. So they're also provincially threatened. So they need a lot of room to roam. They're really picky about the lands they travel through, and they're very important to the Stoney Nakoda nations, Canadians, and all of those who come to visit Canmore. So the Bow Valley is the heart of the Y2Y region, and it's gone through an enormous amount of change over the last few decades, and we're suspecting this change to continue. What's missing really is a clear idea on how things have changed, or what's been missing. There's work happening. How they might continue to change, and what it means for the unique role of the Bow Valley and playing the unique role that the Bow Valley plays to help these types of species. So last year, Y2Y, with the help of the Alces group, published a report that considered how grizzlies move across the landscape, as well as measuring the risk of human-bear conflict, resulting in 3 different scenarios: limited urban expansion, so limiting the growth of buildings and human footprint, no informal trails, and limiting the number of people who actually do recreate. And so compared to a base case scenario that we set up, we went back to 1950, had the base case of 2020, and compared to moving forward, we did some modeling to figure out that actually, surprisingly to us, informal trails really have the greatest impact on grizzly movement and pose the greatest risk to increase in human-bear conflict. Shortly or slightly behind that was urban expansion. Slightly behind that was restricted recreation. So it was surprising to us. So really, what's happened since this model? The cumulative effects model that we commissioned was intended to provide some evidence-based forecasting of these various pathways to address risk of conflict with grizzlies. It didn't provide recommendations. However, there have been some developments since. We're going to hear about a few of these things tonight. Since our work, several initiatives are underway in the Bow Valley. Just today, there was another meeting with the Human-Wildlife Coexistence Technical Working Group. They continue to meet to address the 2018 report to see how far we are moving, how well we are moving with the recommendations that are in that report. So as Gareth mentioned, the Canmore area trail study is coming out. That's a multi-jurisdictional plan that's really going to take a look at how to accommodate all types of users within the trails in this region. Colleen Cassidy St. Clair, professor at the University of Alberta, and Peter Thompson, who you're going to hear from later, they're working on some modeling of grizzly and wolf movement to really align our understanding, a better understanding of how their movement interfaces with human behaviors. And then just recently, we learned that CAMBA is undertaking a trail camera study to help with the collection of this data. I'll let Justin speak to that. So with funding from the Banff Canmore Community Foundation, Y2Y is currently working on producing a report called Wise Practices for Human-Wildlife Coexistence in the Bow Valley. This builds upon that 2018 report that I mentioned, And it's going to offer a few examples on how to address some of these cumulative effects. So what's possible? It's always best to start with peer groups. It's easier to learn from them and build with others than to blaze a new trail. So the Wise Practices Report responds to these scenarios of limited expansion, informal trail mitigation, and managed recreation. So there's a few specific case studies I'd like to talk about. One being visitor use management strategies, or related to visitor use management strategies, one being related to coexistence ambassador programs, and one related to a Trails Alliance. So this one right here, this is an example out of Moab, Utah. It's a program called Do It Like a Local. What's interesting here is that a lot of gateway amenity communities who sit next to parks and wild places are all seeing similar problems. They're seeing spillover of visitation. They're seeing the same challenges that parks are seeing. And so Do It Like a Local really is about being smart, being informed, being courteous, being a good steward. But beyond first informing and first getting the culture in place within Moab, they've had campaigns to that extent to visitors. So they have pack it in, pack it out, don't bust the crust. So things that really help people to understand where they're coming and how they need to behave. So ads and articles have been targeting visitors now. Next one I want to talk about briefly is the Fernie Tourism Master Plan. So launched in 2022, the Regional District of East Kootenay's Sustainable Tourism Project really informed Fernie's Tourism Master Plan. It really claims to support tourism and recreation by helping to take care of important nature-based locations, to collect data for decision-making, and to promote safe and responsible front and backcountry recreation. So this report actually calls out things like closing the Wigwam River Road during March to June to allow bighorn sheep and their lambing to take place. This particular example is great. This is the Teton Freedom Riders. This is a Mountain Bike Trails Alliance. They signed an MOU with the Bridger Teton National Forest to maintain their trails, to decommission trails that were not accepted in the official network, and to help self-police everyone who rode them. Now they imbue a culture that accepts seasonal closures and has a greater awareness and respect for the needs of wildlife. This is a great quote from the Wilderness and Trails Manager from the U.S. Forest Service, Linda Mariglano, who helped finalize this MOU. She said that you don't need to create accountability just through regulation. It has to come from an internal sense of ethics, where there is a community norm that this is just the way we do things here. We're respectful of other people and wildlife. And so what's important to note about these three really brief examples that I gave you is how they collectively approach a powerful lever in systems thinking, which is shifting mindsets or changing culture. The three primary takeaways from these precedents that I'd like to give you all is really to think how nature works, think like nature. And in that sense, think regionally, think beyond jurisdictional boundaries and collaborate. Another is to behave in ways that focus across that cross-jurisdictional collaboration. And thirdly, elevate nature to be a stakeholder, even a rights holder, to ensure they're not just perceived as a resource to manage or to use, but an inseparable component of our ability to flourish as a community as well. How am I doing on time? All right, I do have time. So I want to tell you a little bit about what Y2Y is up to elsewhere in the region. We have a lot of projects going on that are related to responsible recreation. We have a science team at Y2Y, and they're taking a look at a very large recology project that takes a look at all kinds of recreation throughout the seasons, and it encompasses this particular region. There's just a paper published in the middle with the understanding of who and what, who is recreating, where it's recreating, when it is. Next up, we're going to overlay that data with sensitive habitat to actually give some recommendations as to where maybe things need to be curtailed or maybe where there are opportunities for more recreation. In May, we sponsored and co-collaborated on a responsible recreation conference in Revelstoke. Beyond Bagby was the film that was showcased there that looks at recreation as a consumptive industry, as perhaps even one that might need to sort of shift on how it perceives itself, including place names. So the conference was a huge success. It brought a bunch of different groups to the table. motorized industry, non-motorized industry, bureaucrats, businesses, nonprofits, and we heard from everyone that they want to see it happen again. So this is likely going to be something that's repeated. We're going to have spin-off groups to start addressing some of the particular issues that are happening there. So stay tuned for that. We also work on a more local basis. This is a graphic from a sign that we produced for the Upper Columbia region to help caribou, wolverine, grizzlies live their best lives as well. And so we're always on the lookout for new ideas and new partners, and would love anyone to reach out. So thanks for your time. I'm going to stop there, and thanks.
Okay. So each of these speakers has 10 minutes. You may well have a question for Josh, or at the end you may have a question for any one of these gentlemen. So here's how it's going to roll. I'll ask you to jot down your questions or just make a note. After Peter has spoken, he's the last speaker. Then we'll throw it open for your questions, and that's people on listening on Zoom can type in a question, and thanks to Nick, we'll be able to process those and push them out into this room so we can have those questions answered. And as you're thinking about a question, think about a question for any one individual speaker or all three if you wish. Totally up to you. It's my pleasure now to introduce the next speaker, Justin Deoliveira. Yeah. Oh, Peter's back. Okay, fine. We can do that. Thanks, Josh. Dr. Peter Thompson. Peter's a biologist, currently working at the University of Alberta. He's studying how grizzly bears and wolves move through the wildlife corridors surrounding Canmore and how they react to the presence of humans recreating in the landscape. Peter hopes to use his background in data analysis and modeling to predict how these animals may adjust to changes in land use in the valley. He will be working with remote camera data as well as GPS collar data to analyze the movement patterns of these elusive animals. He also enjoys getting out in nature and birding and loves to visit the Bow Valley when he can. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Dr. Peter Thompson.
All right, clicker works. Thank you very much, Gareth. I'm super excited to be here and really happy to see the great turnout. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what I do and hopefully inspire the opportunity for me to get some feedback from all of you wonderful people who spend your lives living and playing in this beautiful valley. So a little bit about me first. I mean, Gareth covered a lot of the important stuff. The real key of it is I'm someone who really cares about the environment, and I care about this land and ensuring that the living things that exist, including humans, can prosper in a sustainable and happy way. And you know, I'm just interested in making sure that the good things that we have in our society can persist, and that includes all of the wonderful wildlife that we have here and across the world. My background is originally more in statistics and modeling, and I am eager to use that background to try and answer some questions with really, really complex and multifaceted answers, oftentimes to do with interactions between humans and wildlife. It's not just me, of course. I have a team of wonderful collaborators, including Colleen Cassidy St. Clair, who is here, as well as John Paskovsky and Jesse Whittington, who live here in the Bow Valley. All of these people have lots of experience in this valley studying these animals, and I'm incredibly fortunate to be able to work with all of them, as well as the many other people, some of whom also in this room, that provide me with guidance and knowledge to conduct my research in the most effective way. So this is Canmore. We all are probably a bit familiar with this map. This is one of the few places in the world where the phrase wildlife corridor is kind of a household name. So I will not go super in depth into what a wildlife corridor is, but you can kind of see where they are. And you can see how there are these sort of linear features that link together the habitat patches that contain the resources that large wildlife need in order to live and get enough food to eat and be secure. So we have this patchwork of patches and corridors here in the valley. And basically, we need to make sure that the animals that live here, particularly the large carnivores like grizzly bears, wolves, and other species that are particularly wary of human presence. We need to make sure that these animals are actually capable of using the corridors. Because if you squint close enough at this map, you can see that the corridors are close to town, and there are lots of trails in them, and you probably all spend your time in these corridors because a lot of them provide a really a great user experience for all sorts of recreationalists. And so broadly speaking, I want to make sure that these corridors, as they are currently set up, are still allowing animals like grizzly bears and wolves to move through. And if they're not, what can we do on a management level in order to improve the efficacy of these corridors? So as I kind of said, I'm interested in figuring out the specific relationship between grizzly bears and wolves. The big question, we know that these animals don't really like people most of the time. If they generally try to stay away from people, some bears get habituated, but that's another story. These animals, they generally don't like people, but the specific aspects of what are we doing specifically that is causing these animals to stop using areas that would otherwise have suitable habitat. Those are the really nitty-gritty specifics that we are trying to figure out. And eventually, we want to be able to identify those specific things, like what types of recreation have differentiating amounts of reach or effect on the movement patterns of these animals. And we want to be able to leverage the information that we gain in order to generate predictions about how the space use patterns of these animals might change. So for example, if we build a new trail somewhere and a bunch of people start using that trail every day, what is that going to do for the grizzly bears and wolves trying to move between habitat patches in the Canmore area? And we have a lot of amazing data that's been collected over the years by the provincial government as well as Parks Canada that can help us answer these questions. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the data that I'm working with and how I hope to use it to try to answer these complicated questions. The first data set that we have is a really impressive array of remote cameras or camera traps. These are usually placed somewhere in the forest, and they have a motion detector such that when something like a bear or a wolf, as pictured here, walks in front of the camera, snaps a little photo. This is really powerful because we can just put the camera up, leave, and then it's collecting data for months on end. And pretty much always, if a wolf walks on that trail, we know because the camera will take a picture if that animal goes through the field of view. So this is really powerful. We get lots of data. We get data on all sorts of species. We can actually even see to an extent whether humans are using the trails. I will provide a disclaimer that I do not see any of the actual pictures of people. So there is privacy. I'm not trying to act like we're snapping pictures of people. The data are all collated into spreadsheets and then thrown out. We have a wonderful team of volunteers, some of whom are here, that are maintaining the cameras constantly. And many of the cameras in the Bow Valley, as you can see here, are still active and working as we speak. So we are constantly collecting more and more data that we can use to figure out why these animals are going where they are going. We also have data from animals that have been affixed with GPS collars. So for example, we get really cool data like from this individual grizzly bear. We can see basically everywhere it goes for an entire 2-year period. And so you can kind of see this bear moving around south of Canmore. I think that maybe is the Nordic Center. And then it ends up going down and hanging out down by the Kananaskis region for a little bit. And we can see everything about this animal's doing for years on end. We get a really complete picture of its behavior, what it likes to do, where its favorite little patches in the forest are. And this provides us with a lot of power that the cameras cannot, because we can see the same animal over and over again, and we know where it's going, when it's going there, and how fast it's moving at any given time. We have tons and tons of GPS data for dozens of bears and wolves all throughout the Rocky Mountains. So that little red box is kind of the Bow Valley. And so we've got animals moving all throughout Alberta and BC. And we hope to be able to use this data to generate those predictions I was talking about as to how will these movement patterns change if human use increases or decreases in the future. So that's about all I have. I think I might have actually finished a little bit ahead of time there, but I will plug just very quickly a few things. So there's my email. I would love for anyone in the audience to reach out to me if you have more questions about what I work on that can't fit into today's discussion. I really value the knowledge and the beliefs and the opinions of folks who live in Canmore and spend their lives here, because I do not. I sort of come back and forth. I'm here for another couple weeks, but usually I'm not here. So your thoughts and feedback is incredibly valuable to me. I also want to plug, there is a survey going around, and there is a master's student named Chloe who is seated here in the third row. I guess I won't like expose, Chloe is here. And she's been working really, really hard, and she's been doing a fantastic job organizing and planning the distribution of and handing out surveys. She's out there at trailheads in the middle of hot days and rainy afternoons every single day, asking people to fill out surveys. And we really value, like I said, we really value your opinions. This survey is going to allow us to collect data about people's beliefs and relationships with the land, which is just so incredibly invaluable. So if you would like to take the survey, you obviously don't have to, but you can just scan that QR code with your phone, and you'll be redirected to the link where you can fill it out. It should take, I think, about 15 minutes. Is that right, Chloe? Yeah, there you go. So anyway, I really look forward to hearing your questions in the panel discussion. Like I said, I want to know what you all want to know about wildlife and recreation on trails. I want to know what would be helpful for everyone in this room to see, what you feel uncomfortable about or what you feel unsure about when you're deciding where to go. Those are the things that we are trying to find out here, and that I'm eager to help everybody learn together. So with everybody here, I'm confident we'll find a solution that makes everyone happy, including the bears, the wolves, and more. And I look forward to hearing your questions in a bit.
Thanks, and just a quick thanks, Jess, that was really great. Just a quick shout out to this notion of social science. Like, there's lots known, the Wide did a great job of characterizing what's known about the science. The social science is the science that applies to us, and that's always appreciated by researchers. It's always undervalued and underfunded, in my view. And boy, is it important. You got to, this is not a wildlife management problem; it's a human management problem. Is one way of thinking about the paradigm there. And so I'm very grateful to Colleen and Chloe and just come and talk to Chloe afterwards if you want to know more. And I gather there's materials with that QR code posted around town, trailheads, bars. If you go to bars, you can do your dissolute kind of whatever you do in bars, but you can also fill out the survey and do something good for us. Anyway, and I'll stop talking about that immediately and introduce our next speaker. And I'm just so thrilled that Justin could be here. So Justin Deoliveira. All right, how do I do? Deoliveira. Yeah. Justin is president of the Canmore Area Mountain Bike Association. Justin moved to the Bow Valley in 2007 and instantly fell in love with trails and mountain biking. When the CAMBA was formed in 2016, Justin saw an opportunity to give back to the trails in Canmore, an area that he had enjoyed for nearly a decade. Offering his skills and expertise in IT as a software developer, Justin helped build online infrastructure for CAMBA, such as a website, a digital membership system, and other applications the association utilizes for its day-to-day operations. To this day, Justin continues to serve as CAMBA's IT guy. In his role as CAMBA president, Justin works daily with land managers across the Bow Valley to further CAMBA's mission of building and maintaining trails for everyone to enjoy. When not meeting with decision makers, Justin can often be found at the Canmore Nordic Center, grooming the winter network for pat biking as one of CAMBA's active snowed roomers. I'm really excited that CAMBA and Justin were able to join us. Take time for Justin Deoliveira.
Thanks, Karen. My name is Justin Yellowberry. I'm the president of the Canmore Area Mountain Bike Association, better known as CAMBA. And 10 minutes isn't a long time, so I'm going to jump right in. The talk tonight is going to focus on this question about how do we balance creating exciting, fulfilling recreational experiences on trails
with the needs and maximizing safe space for wildlife. This is some data from the most recent Town of Canmore Citizens Perspective Survey, where people are asked to rank in terms of importance various programs and services that are provided in our area, and trails, outdoor green spaces actually ranks overall number 2 on this list. So we know trails are important in our community. We know going out and recreating in wild spaces is in our DNA in this community, but we can't ignore the fact that when we're out in these wild spaces, we are having a negative impact on wildlife. CAMBA as an organization tries to take a wide view of trail use. We do have mountain biking routes, but we consider ourselves a general trail association. That's just a reflection of the fact that we're a very multi-user place. There are very few just mountain biking trails in Canmore. All our trails pretty much permit cycling, hiking, running, dog walking, equestrian use, etc. That said, as a mountain biking group, there are a few specific challenges to our sport. The nature of our sport means we're recreating at speed. That means we're covering more ground more quickly, which increases the likelihood of an interaction with wildlife. What's even worse is that by recreating at speed, there's the potential for surprising wildlife, and a surprise encounter is really the worst type for both the human and the wildlife. And just the fact that our sport has changed so much, technology on bikes is evolving. We have things like e-bikes that now allow us to cover even more ground and access different types of terrain that wouldn't have been accessible maybe a decade or so ago. And so as an organization, I think there's an onus on us to take these issues very seriously and work with groups to try to do what we can to offset our impact of recreation. So to put the problem in context, this is a map of one of our trail networks in town. I'll leave it as a game for you to guess which one. But what this is showing is the sanctioned allowed trails in this area. And so this is what you're going to see when you go up to look at the maps in the area. A couple of years back, in doing some planning from this area, we actually GPSed the actual trails that get used in this area, and it actually looks more like this. The reason I include this is because I think this is an example of a worst case scenario. You've taken a large area and cut it up with recreational trails into small little bits that really infringes on the ability of wildlife to move safely through this region. So ask yourselves this question: why do people not stay on designated trails? So this is obviously a really complex problem with a lot of different aspects, but we kind of boiled it down to 4 main things. Getting people from point A to point B with connectivity, telling people where to and where to not go with trail signage, addressing trail use and trail overuse with conflict, and providing the experience and types of trails that people want to use in this area. So digging into connectivity, we're pretty simple as humans. We're generally looking for the shortest path, easiest path from point A to B, much like wildlife. And the unfortunate fact is that if adequate connectivity doesn't exist, people will go and just create it. And so this is something we measure. We actually have a survey that we do every 2 years going back to 2016, where we ask people about various aspects of trails in our community. What people think about connectivity is one of them. And we always see a high percentage of people that think that trail connectivity in Canmore needs to be improved. Now, this involves getting to and from networks, but also navigating within a network as well. Similar with signage, if we don't have adequate signage and wayfinding utility, we can't expect people to know where to go, and we can't expect them to make a responsible decision about where to go. And so this is another thing that we ask people about the survey, and even a higher percentage of people that think that signage and wayfinding in this area needs to be improved. I think this is especially crucial with visitors. So this is kind of a classic example of what you're going to find in Canmore. You have a sanctioned trail with an unsanctioned offshoot that goes directly into the middle of a wildlife corridor with no signs telling people where to go and where not to go. When people do see signs, they might see something like this. We can debate the utility of this sign, but I think we honestly have to ask ourselves, is this the best we can do? And can we supplement this sign to increase the wayfinding utility through this area? Trails are a busy place. Anyone that uses our trails regularly sort of anecdotally has noted that the trails seem much busier. I think COVID was a catalyst for this. This was actually something we measure. Josh mentioned CAMBA maintains a pretty extensive at this point network of trail counters. And so the data we get from our trail counters, this is data from that same region I showed before, confirm this trend that trail use is increasing and trails are becoming a busier place.
The upshot of this is that when trails become crowded, individual user groups feel like they can't recreate safely or don't have the space to recreate the way they want. And again, this will force people off designated trails, creating their own paths. And finally, providing the experience. I mentioned this before with bikes evolving and things like e-bikes. Terrain that might have been only accessible to, not been accessible at all, to accessible only to experts is actually, due to the advancements in mountain biking technology, accessible to intermediate and even beginner riders in some case. And this has really created an explosion for demand for technical trails. Again, we asked people in our survey what's one of the biggest things they think the network is lacking, and it's more technical, more challenging trail experience. So that's a little bit about the problem. How can we make things better? Again, multifaceted problem requires a multifaceted solution. We've created a couple of buckets of things here. We really do need to talk seriously about providing that recreational need. We need to educate users about responsible trail use. We need to enforce good behavior and discourage bad behavior. And we need to measure everything with data. In terms of providing the need, this can really fall into two categories. We can build new trails for people, but we can also improve the existing trails that we have. In terms of building new trails, we can do it responsibly and try to respect the integrity of wildlife corridors as best we can, rather than allow people to build informal trails on their own and not take into account things like corridor. In terms of improving what we have, I think it's time to revisit this multi-user on the same trail approach. Can we use the trails and split them up to provide better experiences for individual users so they're not going off trail? This is an example of sort of corridor integrity and trying to bundle with existing disturbances, but within a corridor. So the idea here is, rather than put a corridor like the solid green line through the middle of it, if there's an existing disturbance such as a power line or a highway through a wildlife corridor, I know how that sounds, we should try to push out to the edges and try to bundle with it. So you might be asking, well, building new trails and splitting up users onto trails, isn't that going to increase trail density and have a negative impact on wildlife? We're not going to dispute that. I think the answer is yes, but I think what we're trying to say is this is not sufficient for recreation. Something like this could be better and provide the need. And for wildlife, this has to be better than this. In terms of education, I think signage is key. Now, I think more signage and improved messaging is what is needed here. Just a little sidebar to talk about the effectiveness of signage. This is an example where we had an unsanctioned offshoot of a designated trail where actually the majority of the traffic was going into a high conflict zone where we don't want them to go, with no signage at the junction. And so what we did was we installed some trail signage at that junction and measured the before and the after. Before signage, we found that 27% of the people were actually staying on the designated trail, not what we want. Just by installing signage, that jumped up to 68%. So signage does have a measurable impact. In terms of getting the message across, this is kind of the type of sign you'll see that messages the stay on designated trails message. This is a lovely sign, but we have to ask ourselves about the effectiveness of the sign. Is it too busy? How are people going to interact with this sign when they're recreating at speed, like on a mountain bike? Can we do better? We play around with more creative, simpler messages that get that same message across and actually go behind for some of the justification. That designated trail sign doesn't say anything about why I should stay on designated trails, but something like this might actually get that message across a little better in a fun way. Bad behavior versus good behavior. Got a minute left. It's not a good sign of a trail network when over 50% of the use is on unsanctioned illegal trails. We do need to provide pathways for legitimate trail building and legitimate trail use, and that's the biggest thing we can do to dissuade illegal trail building. And of course, there's things like closing down illegal trails immediately and doing things like monitoring. But the sad reality is that when users don't feel their needs are being met, they're more than willing to take it into their own hands. And again, just about data, measure everything. There's no sense in making any changes to trails and trail use if you're not measuring the before and the after picture. You're just guessing at that point. And we saw some great data from Peter's presentation and Josh's presentation. We obviously gather a lot of data on the recreation side of things. We should really be sharing that data together so that each individual group actually sees the entire picture. Thank you.
Wow.
All right, so thanks, Jackson. That was fantastic. And thanks to all of you. So let's get into the question and answer segment. So here's the big idea. We'll set down the projector so that the screen will stop doing what it's doing. Nick is going to be processing some of the great questions from the Zoom community. But this mic will go to anyone in here who wants to ask a question. So, and we've all agreed that it's okay for us to just park ourselves. I'll invite the three gentlemen to come on up here and just sort of stand to my left, and this mic will be the ones that we. Oh yeah. This mic will be the one that we pass around. So I'll just thanks. Let's go back there now. And so, and we'll begin with questions from the audience in this room. So if you have a question, just like if you have a, you all look like good people. So I know that there won't be any grandstanding. You won't be standing in your chair and making a speech about kind of how it should be, but rather you might have a one sentence preamble and then a question for any one of these gentlemen. We're all these guys. And next time we do this, we'll make sure we have more than just gentlemen up here, but maybe Chloe can come up and do her thing and mix it up. Anyway, I won't apologize for you, but we'll mix it up next time. Who has a question for the panel? Please just stand up, state your name and preamble if you must, and then a question who it's for.
Hi, thanks everybody. I actually appreciated all of the different perspectives, and I think it. Quickly for Josh and for Peter, just so I can understand the cumulative impact models and any of the future predictive models, what are the parameters that go into generating those models? And then do you contrast that with habitats that don't have human use within them? All right, good night, everybody.
Okay, hear me all right? Yeah, okay. Great question. So most of the stuff I'm working on, basically the framework that we are trying to develop is we're trying to design models that explain the patterns we see in the movements of these animals. So we're looking at the collar data and we're trying to understand, maybe we see that they like certain areas with this habitat quality, and we can assess that using remote sensing data that have been collected using satellite imagery. So, simply even just the color of a pixel or the type of light that's returned and reflected by a satellite can tell us what type of habitat is likely there. We obviously know about the topography of certain areas, elevation, slope, and all of those things that are undoubtedly going to explain where these animals like to hang out. And we can observe and quantify those patterns from the movement because we see that they prefer to, head towards this area or hang out here. Or when the landscape looks like this, they move slower. These sorts of things there are sort of the behaviors that we can try and quantify. And then the next step in my work is to use those parameters that we have quantified to try and generate sort of predicted or simulated movement patterns. And so we would sort of generate predictions and see how would these animals hypothetically move, and you sort of get a distribution in the long term of where do we often see these animals, what sort of paths are they taking to get from A to B, given what the environment looks like. And the next step from that, assuming that those models predict well with what we observe in real life, is to potentially say, okay, what if we close this trail? How would the movement patterns change? Would they use this corridor more? Would we see them sort of taking that path? Would it be better if there's not a giant trail there? What if we even just had temporal closures, like, from 9 p.m. to 7 a.m., don't come on this trail. Or during the month of June, don't come onto this trail because this animal is here. And so those are the sorts of conclusions that I'm looking into. Very specifically right now to grizzly bears and wolves, but with sufficient data, that approach can be applied to pretty much any animal that you can put a GPS collar onto. And lots of people have been doing this sort of thing in the Rockies in different areas. And I'm hoping to bring that perspective specifically to Canmore to try and inform some of the management and some of the trail development and design that's going to be taking place here in the next few years.
Did I hear the second part of your question again? because Peter did a much better job than I could have to talk about the methodology. We use similar methodologies with the cumulative effect model.
So, oh geez, now I forgot my own question. I was so enraptured with the answer, right? It's a perfect answer. And then, sorry, you contrast it with data sets from animal movements and you don't have to go back, but it was a long question, in habitats that do not have any human interaction.
No. I mean, that's the short answer. We were really interested in the cumulative impacts of human presence. So we specifically modeled things related to what human presence means. And those top three things, development footprint, trails, new trails, and then numbers of people on those trails where we landed on that work. So I don't have much more to say than that. I mean, other than the fact that we're looking to replicate this elsewhere, because I mean, my organization's mission really is to find that balance so that wildlife and humans can thrive. And so there's always a human component to what we do. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
I will just very briefly say, and I'm not trying to make this competitive, but for the work that I'm doing, the answer is yes. And the reason we were able to do this is we have these animals collared, and we have a lot of animals collared all through the Rocky Mountains. And that's the power of GPS collar data is, you know, generally when we're finding a bear and affixing it with a collar, it's a place where we can easily get in there and find the animal. But after it gets collared, it can go off anywhere and we know where it is. You know, it can go climb up to the top of some mountain that nobody's ever been to. It can go hang out in the backcountry. And certainly all of these animals are exposed to human use to some extent because there's a lot of people and human use can have very wide-ranging effects. But generally we get these animals, we can see them traveling around in places where there's not a lot of people for quite a bit of time. We can see how they behave.
The last thing I'll say is we looked at all the data within the region. And I mean, one interesting anecdote was the evidence of the 2013 flood, sort of extirpating grizzlies from the canyon or the valley that comes out where Extra is. Our assumption was the data just sort of stopped, and our assumption was that that flooding event actually removed all food sources. So we were looking at things, but our focus really was interaction with people.
I will confess that somebody, you know, I've always been long-term resident of the valley. I've always been concerned personally about the impact of development. It was a game changer for me to understand through the wildlife study that human-based recreation has a bigger impact than development X or development Y, or that's noteworthy. We have a question that Nick will read from the Zoom community here.
Thank you. For Justin. Are bikers building illegal trails aware that there's a parks volunteer group that identify and tear down their illegal structures? Might be a good communication for them.
People are aware of this, but to be frank, it doesn't happen fast enough to really have an impact. When people can get 5 years, in some cases 10 years out of an illegally built trail before it's decommissioned or changed in any way, just do the cost benefit analysis and they'll do it, and then they'll just move on to the next one. People that build illegal in this community have gotten quite smart. They know when to do it, so they're not going to get caught. So yeah, I think they are aware.
Thanks, Justin. Next question from the group.
Hi, I'm Chad. I'm the Vice President of CAMBA. I have a question for the, not for Justin.
That's what I
would do. Yeah, for you too. Was there anything in your study that when you looked at the data, you were very surprised? And was there also something that you saw movement of wildlife in an area that is not a corridor and you think should be a corridor based on the data?
Well, I will say I still have a lot of work to do on my project, I must admit. But what I will say that I've found so far that is surprising is it seems like the spatial reach of disturbance from humans recreating on trails might actually be even wider than we expect. So we have a whole lot of cameras set up, as I briefly shared. And what we can see is that not only does the presence, if a trail is very heavily infused with human recreation, that is likely to decrease the amount of wildlife detections for grizzly bears and wolves on that trail. And that effect is pretty significant. Threshold is not super high in terms of human beings visiting the trail per day. It's not in the hundreds. It's maybe in the teens. But additionally, we're seeing that if you have a trail that is up to 1 kilometer away, and these are preliminary results, but so far what we're finding is suggesting that if you have a trail that's up to 1 kilometer away, significant use on that trail of say 10 people per day can actually reduce the detection rate or the abundance of wildlife in that area for up to 1 kilometer's distance, which is quite a lot. I mean, especially when we're considering sort of how wide these corridors are. It means that these effects can range quite a ways when we have consistent use with lots of people on these trails. So we still have a lot of digging to do in terms of why that effect is showing up and making sure that it is statistically rigorous. But it definitely seems like, for me, I just personally think that giving these animals a safe haven, whether that is in space or in time, and that could mean something like allowing trails to be recreation free for certain times of the day, allowing animals to have time where they can use these habitats and not be disturbed by people seems more important than we may have thought previously.
I think hearing what Peter's saying is super important to sort of contrast with the actual width of our valley. It's about 7 kilometers, I think. It's narrow. It's really narrow. And we've pretty much built out the gravel riverbed floodplain where all the wildlife want to be. So we don't have much left to sort of play with, really. I don't think we had much surprising information when we did the cumulative effects model, but I think where Peter's work is super essential in sort of filling in the sort of finer grained understanding. The recreation ecology work that we're doing at Y2Y, which is a coarser grain, looks at a region that's massive. It incorporates this part, but what we're finding is that in BC and in Alberta, where we've done this study, upwards of 25% to 30% of the trails that we've been able to identify through all the data sources we've been aggregating are unsanctioned. So it's not just a problem here, but I think that because we are ahead of the curve in some ways, because we have a lot of focus here, a lot of privilege, we can probably help to sort of lead how others may behave within the broader region and our sister towns and throughout the Rockies. So.
Thanks, gentlemen.
Can I make one follow-up to the previous question? Just because I have an example. So the question was about a volunteer group that goes out and sort of decommission structures on illegally built trails. So we actually have a good example from this past season where that actually happened. I think within a couple of weeks of someone building an illegal structure on a trail, it got decommissioned. And there was some other activity going on that trail and it instantly stopped. So when that does happen, it has a huge impact. It's probably one of the biggest things. Someone wastes a month of their time building illegally, and then a couple of days later it gets shut down. Nothing's going to discourage illegal building more than that. It's just that, in places that are farther out, it doesn't happen as much, unfortunately. So just wanted to add that.
Who's got a good question?
I guess Peter, yeah. You mentioned you compare data from different places, yes?
Yes.
Do you compare data from, so there are some US parks, I'm not sure if this is correct, that don't allow dogs. Is there a huge data difference in how wildlife interact here? Like we have a lot of dogs in the Bow Valley versus like in US areas that don't allow dogs on trails at all?
That's a fantastic question. I don't know the answer. That's something that I am looking into, is the impact of dog walking, both with and without a leash. My understanding is that parts of the Canmore Nordic Center are dog prohibited. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But anyway, I don't have any data for the states, unfortunately. I don't even think any of our bears and wolves were brave enough to meander in there. But certainly, I think at least having data in areas where human use in general is just very low is helpful. And I would guess, based on what we're seeing in the cameras, that there is a gradient of sort of, percentage of recreationalists who are walking dogs, even just in the Bow Valley. Some, obviously some trails closer to town are going to have a lot more use from dog walkers than other places. And so I'm hoping that the gradient that exists in the Bow Valley and more broadly in the entire Canadian Rockies is wide enough that we can potentially still get an effect there.
Thanks so much, all of you, for those presentations. So interesting. I have a question for you, Josh, and then maybe a follow-up one for you, Justin, about the examples you gave of Moab and Curry and Grand Tetons. What was the time frame over which those cultural attitudes seemed to change? Did you get a sense of that? And if you have a sense that it occurred more quickly than in this area, what do you think were the important factors promoting it?
So our next, that's a great question. I mean, we're actually looking into that currently. We did a lot of homework with a few individuals who are on the ground working for those programs. A lot of them are just a few years young. And our next step really is to call them up and have more in-depth questions, and to really get at some of those pieces that you cannot find anywhere else. I don't have a straight answer for you, but I do know that we're surprised at how quickly some of these things turn around. And I think that some of that is largely related to the amount of effort and funding and work that goes into those programs. Like the one in Moab is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It's on billboards, like I showed you.
Yeah.
It's plugged into the tourism bureau. So that anyone who's coming to Moab is getting this messaging. It's on buses. Like, it's super comprehensive. And we found that the programs that seem to be more successful in terms of addressing culture are the ones that really go for it in a really comprehensive way. You want to have a follow-up to that? Because I think that's kind of all.
A quick follow-up for you, Justin, just to be a little edgy with my question. What do you think would happen if some of your members joined the volunteer group decommissioning trails? What I was sort of getting at with you, Josh, is wondering, if the sign was like, act like a local, if it comes from the inside out, does that culture change happen much more quickly? Especially if, as you suggested at the end of your presentation, if it's not just a withdrawal of opportunity, it's a bit of a trade and a compromise and a balance.
Yeah, I mean, our take has always been that without that balance, it just can't work. If you're just taking away, the reality is you might have a few people that are keen, but you're never going to get that critical mass. Whereas if you're replacing with something ideally better or comparable, then I think it's an easier sell. And that's certainly our strategy when we work with any land managers. So, we work with private landowners that have illegally built trails on their land. And, I think they're coming in and expecting us to just shut down these trails. And it's always a discussion and education with them. Look, we can't just take away for reasons that I stated. These trails are important for connectivity. It's not always just about the experience. And so, yeah, I think it has to be that give and take. And I do think you would see the majority of our membership resonate with that. It might take a bit of work to get people on board, but I do think that the majority are people that want to do the right thing. We say, and people might scoff at this, but as recreationalists, we're also conservationists, or at least we want to be. And so I do think the majority of our membership falls within that category.
I'll give a plug to a small project that I was part of at the Biosphere Institute, is the Trusted Messengers project that really sort of looked at, was it alpinists, dog walkers, mountain bikers, and we did small surveys to try to understand some of the local groups that are sort of at the core of the culture of this place in terms of those sports, and it was pretty encouraging, at least from the running side, because that's one I can speak to, because I helped to lead that part. And it turns out that people wanted to behave better. They actually just didn't have the right information in the ways that they needed it. So we presented different mediums. You know, do you need this as a film? Do you need this as a poster? Do you need this social media? And we got some information about that, but it was encouraging in the sense that that was there, that there's this desire to behave better, to be a better citizen, sort of get that part working in the Bow Valley. I think the other aspect to it that was pretty interesting was that as long as there's somewhere to go, people are okay with closures, for instance. But yeah, to your point, you can't say no everywhere. But you have to say, give you the reason as to why, you're saying no. And I think that your question is a good reminder, though, that we do have two factions that we have to worry about. Like, we have to get our home culture right first. Then we have to tackle the larger problem, which is all visitation, which is continuing to increase. And those folks are brand new every day. They don't have that sense of place. So we have to figure out ways to do that pretty quickly so that they can behave like a local. Well,
I'll invite Nick to share a question from the Zoom audience.
This isn't directed to anyone specific, and I don't know if this is an easy answer, but who's going to decide if and when some trail closures are necessary?
Anyone want to deal with it?
I mean, I can start. I mean, as an organization, we tend to look at the land managers. So if we're working with Alberta Parks, we defer to them as to when a closure is warranted. This might not answer the question specifically, but one of the things that Peter said that I found really interesting was, like, through analyzing all the data they have on wildlife movements, can we actually get a little finer grained with the closure, and will that have a positive effect rather than, a mass closure that lasts, those key months in the summer or the spring? And again, to your question, I think, if it's directed and the messaging around that is clear as to why, I think you will see the majority of people respect that closure. I think that, unfortunately, the thinking around closures is like, they're just closing it to be the fun police sort of thing. And there's just not that follow-up on the justification, even though, there's nice signs that have things on them. But again, CAMBA was part of that messaging, trusted messaging initiative. And, we learned a ton, and we actually learned how to talk to our membership about things like closures and just things like wildlife corridors, why they matter and why space for wildlife matters. And we ran surveys, and actually our mountain biking survey, we do a little bit of questions about, what people's knowledge is about wildlife. And like Josh said, almost everyone says they need to know more. So that's a good sign.
Just be brief if you want to respond.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I certainly don't decide. I can make recommendations from the biological side, but there's also the trail user experience side, which is completely different from anything that I'm analyzing. And it's just as important to make sure that, sort of many of the things Justin talked about in his presentation, to make sure that people are getting the experience they want, to make sure that people are able to recreate and enjoy themselves in this valley, but also to make sure that we are being as sustainable as possible in terms of the populations and the well-being of the wildlife.
I used to be a town planner here in Canmore, and from my understanding, it's not yet solved, to whomever asked that question. But I think we're moving in the right direction. The technical working group for human wildlife coexistence, I think, is a good place to have this be discussed. The province in this region is understaffed, but most of the land that we recreate on is provincial land. There are programs out there whereby the town could work with the province to hire more compliance officers, to sort of have more of a collaborative effort around, I guess, policing behavior. But right now, our take usually, or the response usually is bigger for more blanket closures. It's not as nuanced as maybe we need at times. Yeah, I think it's getting there.
Andrew Cottle.
Yeah, thanks everybody. I just think you've given us a lot to think about. Can you give us one thing that we should do as a takeaway from this for each of you?
So one of the things that we always face when we try to spread this message of people respecting wildlife corridors is like, well, you know, this whole valley is a wildlife corridor and they're developing in the middle of this valley. And, you know, I'm just this innocent recreationalist with, you know, no footprint. So like, why does it matter what I do? And like Josh said, I think there's studies that show that's not the case. The way we like to tell people to talk about this is, you know, they've created these wildlife corridors and buffers around development. And when you cut up that area with illegal trail use, you know, you're taking the remaining area and you're diminishing it. And, you know, illegal trails can be kilometers long. So you're talking about wide areas of impact. And so, you know, to say that because there's development here, recreationalists don't need to be responsible is a cop-out. And so I think that's a message that we can all spread to each other. And so if people take that away when they're, you know, having that argument with somebody, that's maybe a talking point you can use.
I guess I could be very blunt and kind of analytical and say, oh, follow the rules because it will increase wildlife on the trails by 74%. But I will take a bit more of a social angle. I'm not a social scientist. And I think it is very easy to be educated. Well, it's, you know, you educate yourself. And if you're educated on, you know, what sorts of behaviors are good to be doing on the trails, it is very easy to, you know, as a single individual to, you know, obey the rules or do what you understand is right. I think in my experience, and this isn't just about trail recreation, it's often more difficult, maybe because it's a bit socially awkward, to call out behavior that you observe from others that you know is not sort of, you know, the best behavior. You know, for example, if somebody is walking, I'm not asking people to just be volunteer police officers, but you know, if you have people in your lives that you know are sort of maybe neglecting some of the regulations in the area, or you know, if you know people that you think could benefit from being educated a bit on these sorts of things, I think spreading that message. It's wonderful that you are all here, but of course, there are thousands of people that live in Canmore that aren't here. And I think I can tell you a lot of good things that you can physically do as a person on the trails. But I think what's more important than that even is spreading that message to those around you that might not go out looking for it in the way that you all have.
For a lot of our work here in the Bow Valley, we work with Stoney Nakoda nations, and I don't know the actual word in the Stoney language, but the phrase is all my relations, or all our relations. And that phrase speaks to all life as peer. And I think that type of sort of paradigm shift in how we see wildlife as sort of a neighbor or someone who also deserves to be here in the forest, in these mountains, can kind of pivot how you see all other aspects of development, I think, in this valley. In the sense that, and I think I spoke to in my presentation, it's like nature is not just a resource, even though we talk about it that way, or an asset. If we start to think about it as being like very central to our livelihood and how we continue to thrive as a community, then I think we can start to sort of find that way, or find our way in a better way. And I'm losing my train of thought, but all our relations really is that phrase that I come back to a lot to sort of ground me in how should I behave? How does the land want me to be here? In what way should I behave for that respect to take place?
Hey, a big hand for these three. Brilliant. I have a couple of things to say before we say goodnight. So, and as you can appreciate, you know, these folks aren't going anywhere. We've got Dr. St. Clair, we've got Chloe Decider, we've got like all stay for to make sure that you get your questions answered. The 3 points I would make is one, and Nick DeRutter, who's the Wild Smart coordinator, taught me this. He's like, yeah. So the concept is if we can do it here, like if there's any place we can pull this off, it's right here. When you think of the massive, of the parks people that chose to come tonight and all of that brain trust, when you think about the research, shout out to the town of Canmore and Caitlin Van Gaal's here tonight. The wildlife ambassadors over the corner that Nick's got 30 wildlife ambassadors that help people understand what's going on the trails, and on, like all of you guys that showed up and came here. So that's one thing we've learned. Like when we go away, we come back and say, you know what we've got going on here, it's not perfect. It's awfully cool, and it's got tremendous potential to pull off this balancing act, balancing the needs of wildlife and people. Wanted to mention that. I'll also mention as promised, I have some information about the Canmore Area Trail Strategy. So I'm just going to read this because Deb Mucha was kind enough to send me this just today. The goal will be, and this is coming soon to a place near you. So here we go. I'm really looking forward to this. The goal will be to establish an integrated, authorized, and sustainable trail system for lands across the Bow Valley that supports functioning of wildlife corridors and habitat patches while maintaining outdoor recreation and visitor experience. The process will include all land within the Bow Valley, including Crown land, designations and land bases, and Town of Canmore and MD of Bighorn, and interfacing with adjacent municipalities, landholders, and the local communities, Harvey Heights, Exxon, Deadman's Flats. Where are we at right now? She says we're finalizing the terms of reference, needs to go through an internal review with government, and approval before it can go out into the public. All that stuff will be posted on alberta.ca, and those who are in the know and bioscope will certainly when they hit the green button mark go, we'll be sure to spread the word on about the opportunities. The timelines are being determined, and we're hoping preliminary engagement and those preliminary conversations, which will, in my view, start where what a great place to start tonight, and we'll build on that and advance on that and get the maps out and just do the hard work to figure this out in a good engagement manner. Anyway, so that the hope is that process will begin this fall. That's where we're at on that front. The only other thing that I'll mention is, and this is just like a little advertorial, but here in exactly 7 weeks minus 2 hours, we'll have another Earth Talks, and I'm very. Pardon? 7 days. Did I say something other than that? Yeah. In 7 months. No. So 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 7 days from now minus 2 hours. It's the April 9th. It's the June 19th. It's an opportunity to go birding. Actually, we won't be stuck in here. We'll go outside to Policeman's Creek. If Peter's still in the valley, you can join us, Peter. And we'll just. I've got some binoculars to land. I'll eat it, and we'll just get better acquainted with the birds and the bird song. Perhaps than we are right now. I want to give a big shout out to the organizer of this, which is the Biospheres of Jupiter. It's also Andrew Cotterill, who holds together. Big hand for Andrew Cotterill. Thank you. Anything else to add from Andrew or Nick, or are we done like dinner, Andrew?
I usually set up a follow-up email. If you didn't register, find me or Nick, and if you want to follow up email with slides or what I can share from them and other information about all this, then I'll send that out. I've got your email address ready.
Okay, thanks everyone. Good night. Yeah, and we use the side doors by Andrew there. No rush.
Yeah. You guys. All right, that's good.
Yeah.
We are so lucky.
Thanks, Reed.